Hi you guys, it's Mrs. Paulson. This is Biology, Unit 8, Segment 1, and the unit is Evolution and Classification. The Segment 1 is the Nature of Science and Darwin. And this unit, the Segment 1, is actually pretty lengthy. It's possible it can go into 2 videos. I'll try to be quick, promise ya. But we're going to start off with just basic things about science. So when you look at diversity, which is the variety of life, how can we account for how diverse this planet is? Like when you look at the biosphere, everything alive, how can we have things that are single-celled bacteria to a multicellular whale to plants that photosynthesize? I mean, how can we have so much variety? What can account for this? And the answer comes in a collection of scientific facts, observations, and hypotheses, and it pulls together into something called the evolutionary theory. We've talked about hypothesis versus theory in class. You understand that theories are held higher than a hypothesis simply because of the wealth of support that is out, scientific support that's out there for theories. So they're very strong as far as that goes. So what is science? We've had this conversation too at the beginning of the year. Science is, guided by natural law, the laws of nature. They must explain what is observed with reference to natural laws. They can be biological, physical, or chemical kinds of laws. Thunder, for example, is caused by ionic transfer, not by angels bowling. So we're looking at collecting and looking at scientific understandings. Science is testable, against the empirical world. So the world of experience or observation alone. It has conclusions that are tentative pending additional information. So they can point in one direction. The data can point us in one direction of thought, and in the future, new understandings, new technology, new evidence can come about and can ultimately change our understanding about a phenomenon. For example, the number of genes on a chromosome has changed. The fluidity of a cell membrane has also changed over time as far as our understanding goes. Science is potentially falsifiable, meaning you're able to, if it can be falsified, it would be. You have the ability to test it, experiment it, explore it more, so that if it is not accurate, that truth will come out. I always think of science as the seek of truth. And also it's important to know that science is unable to answer everything. For heaven's sakes, I teach astronomy, and there's so much about that realm of science that cannot be answered because we simply cannot test it. So anyways, if it is not testable, it is technically not science. That's important to know. And we've talked about that in Unit 1. Here's a few important definitions. Scientific hypothesis, these are words that you've seen before too, but these are testable statements about the natural world. It can be used to construct more complex inferences and explanations. They can often develop into a theory. So trout avoid warm waters. Well, all you have to do, that's a hypothesis, and what you'd have to do is set up an experiment or investigation where you put the trout in both cold and warm and see where they swim. Cold side, warm side of a tank, for example. So that's something that you can actually test. Scientific facts, those are observations that have been repeatedly confirmed, so then we can consider them a fact. The distribution of fossils in the strata, where fossils are found as far as which layers. The fact that humans have 46 chromosomes under normal conditions, that's repeatedly confirmed over and over. The scientific law is a descriptive generalization about how some aspect of the natural world behaves under stated conditions. So there's a few laws mentioned here, but Dalton's law and law of thermodynamics, and you can search up other scientific laws to learn about those. Scientific theory, this is a well-substantiated explanation of some aspect of the natural world. Keywords, well-substantiated. That means well supported with scientific facts, evidence to help support that. So a scientific theory cannot be unless supported by facts, laws, inferences, and tested hypotheses. Okay? Cell theory, heliocentric theory, plate tectonics, dinosaur extinction, these are all theories that exist. And then there's Darwin's theory of evolution, and that really is the bulk of segment 1. Okay? It is also encompassing chapter 15, so on your foundation work you're going to notice a lot of reading of that chapter. And evolution really is truly the underlying theme of biology. When we've been talking about DNA and mutations, and we're talking about how it's copied, we really are at the beginnings of how evolution really starts. All of what we're going to be covering in the future, all of what we covered and are covering in the future is going to really come back to examples of how evolution can be seen, understood, and learned from. Evolution is, in general, evolution, that word, means change over time. And that can be in anything. So music, fashion, Mickey Mouse. Look at the evolution of Mickey Mouse. I think I saw on YouTube evolution of dance, where the guy was dancing through the different music genres that have occurred throughout the years. So to me, that's evolution. Evolution is just change over time. Big deal. Biological evolution, though, is now we're looking at change over time within species. So we're looking at inheritable change. When we talked about genetics, we're not done talking about genetics because it comes into play in this unit too. Inherited change. Mutations creating traits, which are adaptations in species over time. It'll all come together. Modern organisms, with biological evolution, there's an understanding that modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. And Charles Darwin is credited with giving rise to all of this. He was a man that was curious about life, and he went on a trip on the HMS Beagle and gathered information, as much information as he possibly could. He published in 1859 The Origin of Species, and he actually struggled with the publishing of it, getting enough nerve, I guess, if you will, to publish it, but he was influenced by a lot of people at the time. There was people that were talking about fossils and strata and understanding how sediments are layered over time. And so when he's looking at living species now and tying it together with the idea that species have lived in the past and are now fossilized in the layers of the sediment that can actually be dated to when those organisms died, I mean, that really does paint a picture for him on an understanding that people did not really understand at the time. The name of his book is The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. So he is the one that brought light to evolution through the means of natural selection. The ideas that shaped Darwin's thinking, a big question. What factors determine which organisms survive and reproduce? I mean, when he was on his trips and he was looking at these different organisms and how they survive their environments, and he was seeing organisms in all different kinds of environments, you guys. Why can't an elephant live in Michigan, for example? It's not adapted for Michigan's winters. It's not adapted for Michigan's environments. It cannot survive. So things are living where they're best adapted to live, otherwise they die. And so those are some of the things that he was kind of thinking about and in his travels learning about. Like he was actually traveling the world when in those days there wasn't a lot of that going on, and he was taking in the wildlife that was all over the place. So he also was looking at what are humans doing, and there's something called artificial selection and there's something called natural selection. Artificial selection means that you are selecting the traits that you want in the offspring. And humans, by nature, have done that, okay, with any of the like pets that we have or the domesticated animals that we raise, you know, cows and turkeys and chickens and horses and dogs and cats. I mean, we are still hand-picking the individuals that carry specific adaptations that we want to see come out in their offspring. And by doing that, that's something called artificial selection. And in order for us to be successful in that, we have to have the variation to select from. So, for example, there are dogs out there that have gray eyes. Well, that's an adaptation. That's a genetic trait. And if I want to have more dogs or sell dogs that have those beautiful eyes because I know other people will want them and pay big bucks for them, I'm going to hand pick parents that have those traits. Does that make sense? So that's me artificially selecting what I'm going to allow to breed and produce offspring. But the variation had to be present to begin with. Those dogs had to have those eye colors to begin with. And initially, those variations were thought to be defects of the organisms. But by artificial selecting, we are actually speeding up the process of evolution. We're providing the pressures for that. On the flip side, natural selection, this is when nature is selecting the individuals that are best suited for survival in that particular environment at that particular time. And the reason why we have to be particular with the environment and the time is because environments change. And so, I mean, when you think about Ice Age, 12,000 years ago, the environment was very different. It was cold. It was primarily white and bright from the snow. I mean, things, prey stand out if they're not white, for example. And now, obviously, we're not covered with glaciers at this point, and so it's a very different kind of environment. So over time, over long time frames, you can actually see natural selection take place. With organisms that reproduce a lot and quickly, we can actually see natural selection happen faster than that. And on a global scale, guys, that's important to know on a test question. On a global scale, natural selection actually leads to an increase in biodiversity. But there's two ingredients that natural selection must have in order to work. It's got to have organisms in competition. There's got to be a means to wean out the weak or the unfit. And there also has to be variation within the population so that nature has a choice. And if you look at this picture, it's simple as it is. Here's scenario one. You have yellow, gray, and brown beetles. They're all in this environment. Life is great, blah, blah, blah. Bird comes along and can see the yellow beetle best. It can actually detect it in the environment easier than the gray and the brown. So over time, the yellow is picked off while the gray and the brown are allowed to survive and reproduce. So the important thing is that they're reproducing. And so then it leads to a population that no longer has the yellow, or the yellow could be in such small amounts that it's insignificant. Okay, and this is all because of the environment and the adaptations. The fact that there's a variation that's present, there's choice in the environment. There's 3 colors of the beetle. That's the variation. That's the genetic variation that comes down to the genes, and the fact that these birds are hunting for food. They're competing for food. They're on the look for food, and so they're going to go after the food vigorously sometimes. And so that will, the more vigorous it is, the more competition is, the faster the evolution or natural selection through evolution. Evolution through natural selection can happen. Evolution by natural selection. This is what Darwin brought light to. He was the first one, and you guys, there's been so many scientists since him that have collected and gathered evidence showing the same things that he was seeing. But evolution by natural selection is a struggle. It is a struggle for existence. It's competition. Members of the species compete regularly to obtain the food, the space, and the other necessities for life. There has to be competition in order for there to be nature selecting the traits that are going to survive and those that are not. So I'm going to try to finish this slide within the 15-minute time frame before I'm cut off. But survival of the fittest. The fittest is going to be those that are best adapted to survive. Okay? Fitness is the ability of an individual to survive and reproduce in its specific environment. Guys, if it's fit, there's a good chance its offspring are going to be fit as well, since those things are inherited. So adaptation is an inherited characteristic that increases an individual's chance of survival. And adaptations are initially caused by mutations. An example of a fit organism is a cheetah that runs faster. And here's an adaptation to